die with an axe in hand is a glorious death. Or so the Vikings in Assassin's Creed Valhalla say. You'll have that axe with you in the afterlife, in Odin's great hall, on the fields of everlasting battle. So much of pop culture Viking history centers around battles and raiding, and so does Assassin's Creed Valhalla. But as the title suggests, the more important part is what comes after. The mythology of death. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a complex saga of friendship, honor, and gods that the Norse people believed in. These are what life in Valhalla is ruled by, all at once by axe and by fate. It's a world largely seen through the eyes of Eivor, a stoic Norse warrior, or Drengr, as the Vikings would say, who acts as the protagonist. Valhalla is a long, sprawling saga of a game, one that blends myth and reality in a world that's rich with mystery. Background to Eivor's personal complexities is the Viking expansion into England. As Eivor and her brother break off from their father's rule to invest in new land, this, of course, is where a lot of the killing comes in. The expansion into England is complicated by a largely intolerant group of Anglo-Saxons that controls much of the area. This area of England, now called Ravensthorpe, is also a lush world of wildlife, stunning scenery, and growing community knotted by complicated relationships. Assassin's Creed Valhalla allows the player to choose whether they play as a male or female character. There's also a third option, to let the Animus decide. No matter what you choose, you play as Eivor, with just a few changes in how they're presented and what pronouns are used. The Animus chooses female Eivor most of the time. The game decides at different points to switch between the two versions. Normally, it's your female Eivor as long as you're on Earth, and your male Eivor when you technically turn into Odin. The game does decide at different points to switch between the two versions if you let the Animus decide. This happens for mysterious reasons that are explained by the modern world framing device, which is a confusing storyline about how modern-day people access historical memories from the people of the past. It's a spin-off of the larger story that presents throughout the franchise's history a battle between Templars and Assassins, two powerful organizations that control large parts of the world, both of which have different versions of how the world should work. Ubisoft has said that both genders of the character are considered canon for the game because of the choice option. But because there is really no difference between the options aside from looks and voice, it feels hollow, especially given reports of how female Assassin's Creed characters have been sidelined as main protagonists. The perception from Ubisoft executives in the past, according to a Bloomberg report, was that female protagonists wouldn't sell. Yikes. Now, to be fair, the game does work perfectly fine no matter what gender you pick. Now, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is definitely a role-playing game with some stealth influence, instead of the other way around, like most Assassin's Creed games. It allows the player to enact both large-scale battles and quick assassinations while hidden within a crowd. The Vikings, too, introduce their own expression of stealth in their raids, where narrow longships sneak up to encampments to attack without warning. Eivor has an assassin's blade gifted to her from Sigurd. Hers, though, is not hidden. She wears it atop her cloak, because she wants her foes to see their fates in her weapon. And oh, the foes she has. Though some Danes, as the Saxons call them, live in peace with the Saxons, there's a lot of turmoil, and the core gameplay loop of Valhalla has Eivor pacifying different regions in England. Each of these regions is presented as its own little saga, a contained package of storylines that sometimes end with an allyship in hand. These quests, while quite varied, are also very much the same. This game is very repetitive. It took me around 200 hours to beat the game, and I would say it was 50-50. Like, you just kept redoing stuff you constantly did. The fights did feel very samey a lot of the time. Now, you would get your cool, very different ones. And this was very interesting. The combat design allowed you to choose the way you wanted to play. If you're more of a brute force kind of player who always announces a raid before bursting through a monastery's doors, you can also just play as a stealth character. While it is more difficult, you can play how you prefer. Now, most of the time, all of your quests first involve doing a favor for someone in charge of the reason, whether it's driving off Saxon invaders or releasing captured fighters. It's always the same. And then it ends in one large final battle where you fight the final bad guy, and they do always feel almost the same. Valhalla doesn't present a very particularly nuanced system for choices. Whether you want to be a dick or be nice, it doesn't matter. The simplest decisions can make you feel conflicted, but again, it doesn't actually feel like your decisions make a difference. As the storyline moves forward, you earn skill points and level up, blah, blah, blah. Everyone knows about how the open skill trees in these open world games work. While the full tree is overwhelming, you can start out by picking out of 3 different branches of the tree: Raven, Wolf, and Bear. I started with Raven because, Raven Clan. The Assassin's Creed franchise has always been tangled up with religion, but more recently, after Origins, Odyssey, and now Valhalla, they have started incorporating myth and more varied ancient beliefs into the story. Myth is very central to Valhalla. Myth and reality in this game are closely intertwined, so much so that the boundary between them barely exists. Odin, Freya, and Valhalla are just as real to Eivor as God is to the monks at these monasteries the Vikings ransack. You can see this throughout the world, whether it's in the otherworldly quests or even the more mundane ones. During one of the quests, Eivor joins a community celebrating Samhain, a pagan's harvest and festival that is the influence for modern-day Halloween. Residents of this large settlement that is split by a small river down the middle have decorated it all with lanterns and turnips, and you are given a costume to wear as Eivor. Oh, God damn it.
Good evening.
Instead of night, you lie unaware. A terrible sight comes up from her lair.
A wicked sprite has come to scare.
All right, you did cause a fright.
They give Eivor a costume to wear, the traditional Mari Luid costume with an animal skull, and tell her to knock on doors reciting poems for treats. It is a night of mischief and celebration, which is a nice break from the violence of the Viking life we've chose to live. There's a real joy in watching this stoic gladiator of a person walk around town like a kid would, incessantly giddy about everything they've collected, despite how frankly goofy it is. It humanizes this very inhuman Viking warrior, and it fleshes out the world that they live in even more. Now, for me, Valhalla was the first Assassin's Creed game I have ever played. I don't know how this fits into... I don't know how the gameplay fits with the rest of the Assassin's Creed series, or even the story. I got into it because I love Norse mythology, everything about it. And as far as I can tell, they did a fairly decent job of being accurate to most of the stories. And I think being correct on the mythology is a big part of games like this. If you're going to portray them as very mythological and try to target an audience that would like that, it's a good thing that you get the mythology accurate, because a lot of people would be very angry. Now, England in Assassin's Creed Valhalla is populated by some very important historic figures, like Alfred the Great, King of Wessex, and eventual King of Anglo-Saxon England, and Guthrum, the Viking leader who signed an agreement with Alfred that established the Danelaw region while introducing largely peaceful relations between the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons. It also presents a distinctly human version of characters whose stories are often shrouded in the myth-making of the Scandinavian saga writers. Ivar the Boneless and his brothers Ubba and Halfdan children of the half-legendary Ragnar Lodbrok, are brought down to Earth in Valhalla's story as realistically mortal military commanders and politicians. Aside from them, the memorable personalities of the bit players who feature in the game's many sagas liven the stories of perilous diplomacy, cultural uncertainty, and war. Christian as well as pagan traditions, whether Norse, Celtic, or otherwise, butt up against one another again and again, animated by characters whose hope for the future of the Isles is influenced as much by their spiritual belief as their material desires. Valhalla is simply far too long and overstuffed. More than a few of the sagas feel like they could have been side missions that have been extended a bit too far. Their inciting incidents and narrative arcs, repeating plot points about cultural suspicion, power struggles, struggles between old and new religions, have already been made elsewhere and earlier in the game. The game doesn't even really benefit from their inclusion either. If you want to beat the entire game, it can take up to 500 hours. Now, maybe if you go non-thorough and just try to rush through it, maybe you can get through it in 60, but that's a very long game. And you're not going to get everything in a lot of the time. Thankfully, though, aside from the occasional sludgy camera movement in bigger cities or during larger battles, the game does look remarkably good, and it does run really well. I didn't notice many frame drops. I didn't notice many issues. At least the game wasn't full of it just being broken. The problems were more the gameplay in itself, which can be both good and bad. But the sense of place established by the beautiful landscapes and the soundtrack are interrupted by the appearance of glowing mini-map icons on the top of the screen, indicating whether it be nearby treasure or side mission characters or any other random assortment of things. Here are my final thoughts on the game. I almost believe that if you took out the more Assassin's Creed parts of the story of Valhalla, it would actually be better. The weird 21st century Templars and Assassins and Isu civilization random pop-ups are just weird. They don't feel like they fit with the overall story until basically the very end. For 95% of this game, whether you've played other Assassin's Creed games or not didn't matter, which is both good and bad. But suddenly, in the last 10 hours of the game, you're thrown into all of the Assassin's Creed lore, and you almost have no clue what's going on because the game does not the best job of building up that part of the story or that part of the lore. Overall, the story was phenomenal. The graphics were phenomenal. The game design, other than just being too much, there was just too much game to this, was really good. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, while it is the only Assassin's Creed game I've ever played, it is already one of my favorite games that I have ever played. The story is that good. The mythology is that well done. It's just too much of the same thing over and over again. But that is why I am going to give this game an 8.7 out of 10, and I do recommend, whether you are a big Assassin's Creed player, just really into the open world RPGs, or are just a fan of Norse mythology, I think you should pick up this game and give it a shot, especially now when it is going to be much, much cheaper than it was at launch. You can probably find the game for $30 or even cheaper if you go to a GameStop and find it used. And if you can, I do recommend it. But yeah, without further ado, let me know what you think about Assassin's Creed Valhalla down in the comments section below, why you did or did not choose to play it. And yeah, that'll do it for me. So thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Peace.